Hello, I'm Izzy.
And I'm Jessica.
And welcome back to season 2 of The Greatest Genre. We are here, we are back, we are better than ever, and we are ready to dive into the world of Crescent City with you.
I feel like an idiot. I'm just sitting here teasing because I'm so excited.
Me too.
This has been like my favorite reread to date.
I think I agree.
I've reread a lot of favorite books of mine over the years outside of Sarah J. Maas as well. This reread is very special.
It's just more dense than I can tell. There's more to piece together. There are more Easter eggs, all the things that we love about SJM.
This world, these
more.
characters they're stunning.
They're everything. So if you're here for the first time, welcome.
Oh my God. If you're reading these books for the first time with us, I cannot tell you how excited I am for you.
And if
They're
you're
incredible.
here as a repeat listener, welcome back.
Welcome
We're
back.
so appreciative that you are still here with us and that you're still dealing with us. So here's how season 2 is going to go. In preparation for a launch of A House of Flame and Shadow, we are pivoting over, obviously, to the Crescent City
Every time you say
series.
that, I get goosebumps.
I know. I understand. So we can refamiliarize ourselves with the world building, the characters, the plot, all of it, the theories. Nothing is off the table. But we're going to do it a little bit differently from season 1.
We are, yes. And if you've listened to our trailer, this might be a little bit redundant for you, but we are going to be doing topic-based episodes this season. We are going to be releasing one each week leading up to the release of House of Flame and Shadow.
On January 30th.
On January 30th.
It is the Super Bowl for those of us who follow.
So we are kicking off the 6 weeks leading up to House of Flame and Shadow, obviously, with this episode. And today's topic
is
an introduction to the world of Crescent City. This is going to be your crash course.
Yep.
We are going to be giving you an extremely in-depth introduction to Midgard, to all of the forces at play in these series. We are going to be talking about the world, the rules that exist in this world. We're going to get into the history and the lore as well. And it's just going to be a really deep analysis of how the setting has kind of influenced the story.
Totally.
Yeah.
And before we kind of dive in, we just want to shout out a few people. We really used all resources available
The
to
SJM
us.
community is incredible. I just want to start off by saying that, like, as a whole, you all are just amazing. Like, we are freaks and started a podcast about it, but we are by no means even like the most
knowledgeable
passionate or knowledgeable fans. And so we're
just two best friends who really like to talk about it.
We are so lucky to be a part of this fandom where so many people put together incredible resources. And so we do want to shout out, in particular, Yaz the Bookish is amazing, and we've interacted with her back and forth a couple of times, and she is just so kind and wonderful, and she puts together the most detailed
guides. Honestly, like, go take a look before you even start reading.
They're detailed, they're beautifully designed, and they're spot on. And so we leaned heavily on some of these guides as we prepped for this episode because we wanted to make sure that we were getting everything correct
doing our
for
due
you all.
diligence. I'd also like to thank Reddit.
Because just the SJM Reddit community at large.
The Massverse is an incredible place to be.
Yes,
in
like
the
I
subreddit.
said, all of you make this an incredible fandom to be a part of, and you make it really easy for us to be like, when we're prepping, when we have a question for the two of us, what do we immediately do? We just go to the SJM Reddit,
Yep,
and it's
perfect
great.
in every way.
Everyone who contributes to the Crescent City Wiki is amazing. That is a space that is curated by fans, and I think it's an incredible forum for all of us to continue to kind of interact and show our passion for these books, and it's a great thing. Now, given that there is a lot to cover in this episode, we did want to divide this up. This will be the only episode of season 2 that has spoiler-free content. The first portion of this episode is going to be essentially everything that we kind of wish we could have known, because there is a lot of information dumping that happens.
You. We're trying to set you up for success.
And
if
it happens
you have
fast.
not read both books yet, like, this
Yes.
is going to be helpful for you just to get your head around
Right.
the world as it exists at this moment in time when you start reading House of Earth and Blood.
Yeah, and a lot of this content was crafted from basically like the frequently asked questions that we get when we've recommended these books to a lot of people, and we get a lot of the same questions when they start Earth and Blood in particular. You know, there's a lot of confusion around, wait, how exactly does all of this work? What kind of world is this?
It's like that feeling that you get when you start any fantasy novel, but it's times 10, I feel like, in Crescent City.
Yes, because this is a very complex world, and that's the amazing thing about Sarah's writing is that it just keeps getting better and better and better. I will say, there was a lot going on in Throne of Glass, but it happens very gradually.
No, you get thrown right in.
With Crescent City, there's a lot going on, and you are dropped right into the thick of it. And so the first portion of this episode is going to be kind of that crash course. There will be no spoilers. It's just an intro in kind of layman's terms breakdown of the world that you are getting dropped into and everything that is helpful to understand so that you can just sort of start experiencing the events that are unfolding without having to go backwards every 3 pages and be like, wait, what is a veneer? Because I thought it was something that goes on your teeth.
I remember thinking the same thing. Be like, interesting choice.
So,
without further ado,
I think we should dive into it. And before we enter into spoiler land, just as we did in the first couple of episodes of season 1,
warning!
A very clear warning.
When to exit the podcast.
Very clear.
Very, very clear.
Very clear. I think we should zoom out a little bit because the only map we are given is a map of Crescent City, of Lunathion. There is another visual that is created actually by Yaz the Bookish. And this is a visual that was really helpful to me as I was kind of sifting through all of this. And it is just, it's not a map per se. Actually, it's not a map at all. But it is a visual that breaks down, we're going to go planet Midgard, the continents, and then the cities. So just kind of talking you through that. So we'll go ahead and throw that up on the screen first. And then we can sort of zoom in and do
Lunathion. Okay, good idea. Good idea.
And you made a really good point at the beginning of all of this because this is a very different landscape.
And I think that we should just shout it out.
Than her other two series.
Away. So this is like the other 2 series that SJM has written. It very
Throne
much
of Glass
feels like
and ACOTAR.
Feels like the kind of old time fantasy.
It's a very traditional fantasy setting.
Correct. Now this one is, as SJM has actually mentioned in a most recent interview, this is how she imagined like her childhood in New York City, but in the fantasy world. So
if all of the magical things that we wish were real were actually real.
Exactly. But when you're reading it, you immediately notice you're in a very modern world, but then very quickly you realize it actually isn't the same sort of society that we are in now. So it's modern, but very medieval things happen.
Medieval, ancient,
horrible,
crazy. The societal norms of today
are not what is happening.
Are not
in Crescent
to
City.
a T what is allowed to go on. And it's a really incredible blend of cultures, I think, the old world and the modern world, right? Because in some ways it is really progressive. Things like sexuality and gender and that sort of thing.
And you have cell phones and you have electricity and all of these just very day-to-day things that we experience in our world.
Yep. Smartphones, laptops, websites, hackers. There's just all kinds. There's a lot of technology. Ton of modern technology. But to Isabel's point, there is also incredibly brutal practices that are really more akin to something you would see in a show about Vikings or ancient Rome.
At least not modern in the Western sense of the world.
Correct. And there like the institution of slavery is still very real.
Very, very much so.
And so it's a really incredible blend, this world of those ancient old world practices and everything that is normal to us today, like reality TV.
Yeah, so shout out to SJM for making it something that we can experience at the same time.
New take on high fantasy.
I loved it.
It was great.
So, let's zoom out of the world that we are
We're
in.
zooming all the way out. We're in
All
outer
the way
space.
out.
We're looking down on a planet, which is where we're going to start. And the planet where all of these events take place
You might have heard of it before.
It might sound familiar to you if you have watched any of the Marvel Thor movies.
If you've entered the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you will know about Midgard.
Or if you're, knowledgeable about Norse mythology, Midgard in Norse mythology is the planet inhabited by mortals. It is the mortal realm, which is fitting in so many ways. And we have talked about this before in season 1 about how incredible and how very detailed Sarah is when it comes to naming things and choosing names for
She's so intentional.
her settings and for her characters. And so Midgard is the planet where all this is happening on, and it really only has 2 major continents. They're continents, they are also kind of countries. That's Valbara and Pangaea. And I love the point that you
It's
discovered
so funny
about
because
this.
I remember always thinking, like, I know about Pangaea as an old continent. I feel
Right,
like
we all heard about Pangaea when we learned about the dinosaurs and the tectonic plates.
But then I did a little Google while I was prepping for this episode, and the reason that we don't know as much about Valbara, spelled Vaalbara, differently from Valbara in the book, which is Valbara, is because a lot of scientists do not actually believe that it existed, at least not the same, like not in the same way as Pangaea, which is pretty much agreed upon in the scientific community. But the 2 that are agreed,
They were 2 like supercontinents.
Supercontinents are Pangaea and Valbara, and so
I
know.
I just love her so much. How does she do it?
I don't know. I don't
It's
know.
brilliant. I would never even have thought it would be so much easier for her to just
Like make
come up with fun names of things.
Oh my God, Jessica, we haven't cheersed.
Oh God, we do this every time. I'm just so excited.
I know we do.
Okay.
So separating these 2 continents,
Yes.
is the Haldron Sea.
We should probably Google Haldron as well to see if there's any significance to that, but we can do that at a later date.
Okay.
Or you know what? You all can do that for yourselves.
Exactly.
And email us and let us know if there is anything we should know about Haldron. Because Sarah just hides clues everywhere.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything right off the bat, so
Okay.
we're good.
All right. Well, maybe somebody else will uncover something.
Exactly.
But yes, so we have Valbara and we have Pangaea. And Valbara is the continent in which Lunathion exists. Lunathion is a very old city, and it kind of functions as a city-state. So there's not necessarily countries the way that we have today, where it goes continent, country, city, town, that sort of thing. You've got these massive continents, and then you've basically just got sort of city-states within them.
Yep.
And so on Valbara, you have Lunathion, and then you have Avalon.
And these are the ones that we know, the main ones that are mentioned in the books.
Yes, there are more, but the only ones that up to this point play a role in the story on Valbara are Lunathion, which is Crescent City. That is where the majority of all of this action takes place. And then you have Avalon, which are sort of, it's like a misty, they're like islands.
They're islands off of the actual continent.
Major island,
Yeah.
and then I think there are some smaller ones
Yeah,
sprinkled
but
around.
they are like shrouded in like mist, and they are not actually part of the physical mainland.
Yes. And then you have Nidaros, which is outside of Lunathion.
I think it's a couple 100 miles outside. Like Bryce always mentions that she has to get that by train. Like,
Yeah.
it takes a couple of hours.
It's a little bit of a trek.
Yes, and I believe that it is mostly inhabited by humans.
Yes.
There may be some fae, but it is mostly humans.
Yeah. And we'll get into the breakdown of all of the different creatures and races and everything and how that is divided out. But then you have Pangaea. And Pangaea is where the Eternal City is. This is where the Asteri,
Which, again, we will talk about more.
yes, the Asteri are the supreme beings. They rule all of Midgard, the whole planet, and their seat of power is the Eternal City, which is in Pangaea.
Exactly.
It is also where, at the beginning of the story, there is an active rebellion going on. Majority human, some veneer, but majority, it is a human uprising against the control the Asteri, but it is happening across the sea from
just in Pangera.
It is
I
happening
think in the northern areas of Pangera, and it is not yet, as of this moment.
It has not crossed the sea over into.
There have been little
Valbara.
things, but that like nothing major.
Yep, the Asteri's forces have kept it contained to Pangera, so that kind of sets the larger sort of zoomed out.
And literally, Jessica,
Stage of
when
where
I
you
was
are.
reading Earth and Blood, it took me almost until the end of the book to figure out that that's what was going on.
It's tough.
It really is.
Because that's just a lot of context. But I commend her for not taking the easy way out and having some kind of scene where you get that's my biggest pet peeve.
I know.
Context for context's sake. When two characters are having a conversation that they would never actually have
In real
because
life.
they live in that world and they would know that, and so they wouldn't be spelling it out for each other.
You definitely have to work to piece it together for yourself.
I hate that.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
I
we're doing it
love
for you.
that she I love that she didn't do it, and I love that we get to do it.
Yes,
because
exactly.
we're not characters in the story. We are readers, and so we can dumb it down for you and give you the step-by-step play-by-play.
So, as Jess mentioned, we're going to zoom in to Lunathion
Yes.
/ Crescent City now. And it has been rebranded to Crescent City.
Yes.
Basically.
Like I mentioned before, it's a very old city. The Temple of Luna is very old. It kind of sits at the center. The city
city's
sort of
built
expanded
around
around it. It is the walls are circular.
And it is split into 7 major districts or boroughs, if you will, which is how we say them in London, actually.
Well, and it's New York, which is where Sarah grew up. And I just
Exactly.
feel like she took, she must have taken a little bit of inspiration from, Manhattan, Brooklyn.
Totally.
These are all the different boroughs
But
of
of
New
course,
York
there are
City.
7 because we're in the fantasy genre, and 7 is a magical number.
7 is a very magical, it's complete.
It is the number.
It's very important. So yes, there are 7 districts, and nearly all of the districts kind of have their own sort of head authority figure. So just kind of running through those, we're actually going to start at the bottom of this map. And I do think it's worth noting, this is the only map we've been given so far.
Yeah, and this is actually, that's an important point because in her other 2 series, we are given a map of the world as a whole. And as we know, we don't know what this means yet, but SJM doesn't actually do anything by accident ever.
No.
And she only gives us a map to the city proper itself and its surrounding walls. We barely see anything going past like the eastern or the western road. There really isn't much. And so we will, take...
She's hyper focused on Lunathion.
And to be fair,
on Crescent City.
almost all of the action in both books does take place within the city itself, but there are certain scenes that do expand outside.
Without spoiling anything,
Exactly.
we will say, like, this is a city that is part of a larger world for a reason. And so it is interesting to me that the only map we have been given up to this point is a map of Lunathion specifically, this kind of zoomed in. Even in Akatar, we never got a map of, like, the Spring Court.
No, not at all. And in the 7 boroughs that Jess is about to outline, it is important to note that we're going to go through all of their rulers, but there is one archangel that rules over all of them.
Yes. Yep, exactly. So starting from the bottom here, I'm just going to sort of start from 6 p.m. if it were a clock. And so I'm going to start with the Bone Quarter. This is...
It's a very scary place.
It's a little bit dark. So I'll just list them off. So it goes, there's the Bone Quarter, the Meat Market, the Central Business District, Asphodel Meadows, 5 Roses, Moonwood, and the Old Square. There is also the Blue Court, which is not really a part of the city because it exists actually beneath the waters of the Istros River.
It's very mysterious.
Very mysterious. So diving into these one at a time. The Bone Quarter, this is the territory of the Underking, and he's got a very creepy, Grim Reaper kind of vibe going on, and he's just very dark and scary.
And like whenever he is mentioned in Earth and Blood, it is done with a level of like respectful yet scared reverence.
Everyone
like,
seems to get the heebie-jeebies. Nobody really...
super scary.
You don't really want to ever have a reason to be crossing paths.
Seems
with
like he
the
sounds
Underking.
scary and is scary.
Sounds scary is scary, definitely. Similarly, the Meat Market It's also very sort of shady, sketchy.
It's giving the Tenderloin in San Francisco.
Foreboding. Like, this is, you don't really mess with people who hang out in the meat market. It's giving mafia.
Yeah,
it's
and
sort
also
of giving, like, you know,
a lot
just
of
the area of town that's like run
just seedy, really seedy
by seedy people. There's
And
a lot of
it is
black
worth
market
noting-
trade that goes on there.
Worth noting in the meat market that a lot of like the half fae, half human, do end up there as those selling their wares.
Yes, there's a lot of skin trade. There's skin trade that goes on there. There's black market trade that goes on there. And then,
Fighting
of course,
pits.
there are the fighting pits that are run by the Viper Queen. And the Viper Queen is the head honcho of the meat market district.
Yes, she is an asp shifter.
She's an asp shifter who produces her own venom that is apparently highly addictive, though not fatal. it
No,
would
not
seem.
fatal.
Which is interesting because usually snake venom is...
It's not good for you. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, but I've never really heard of it being taken as a drug. So this is... She's a very interesting character.
A very mysterious character.
And she runs these fighting pits. That's where a lot of money is also changing hands. There's lots of gambling that goes on in the meat market. It's just a very seedy, shady place full of intrigue.
And one that you will read about in Earth and Blood.
It's full of secrets. It's full of secrets.
What is that from?
Mean Girls.
Why is that hairball frame so big?
Full of secrets. Okay, so moving up the
To
clock.
the Central Business
Central
District.
Business District. This is the largest district in Lunathion. And it's kind of like the capital city within the city-state. This is where the Comitium is. It is the name, or the Comitium is the name given to the compound that encompasses, you know, the governor's mansion is there. All
Totally.
of the government buildings are there. The barracks for the military are there. The 33rd Legion. And it is the home and operating center of Micah Domitus, who is the governor of Lunathion.
Yes.
And again, just to reiterate, Micah Domitus is the governor. He is an archangel,
archangel.
and he was appointed by the Asteri. He is the head
He
honcho of
answers
Lunathion.
only to, and we'll talk about the structure of leadership in a little bit, but just to make a long story short, he only answers to the Asteri.
He was appointed by the Asteri to govern Lunathion at the pleasure of the Asteri.
Yes. I don't like the word pleasure when used in conjunction with the Asteri, but I understand that you had to do it.
Yes. I think without getting too much more into the power structure, that's the Central Business District. It's big. I imagine it with lots of
Like skyscrapers,
lots of
and tall
skyscrapers,
buildings.
everything's very new and shiny and tacky and yeah. So then, ironically, moving on, you have Asphodel Meadows. And Asphodel Meadows is actually the district where I would say almost all of the humans in Lunathion reside. And they're not given a seat at the table.
No.
We'll get into this a little bit later. The humans are like the lowest class of residents within the city.
They are without socioeconomic status.
And this
in
is just
world.
a corner of the city where they can at least be free of mistreatment and...
I kind of imagine it like the slums, even though I'm sure it's not slummy, but it's like
I mean, I think it's pretty close. It's not a place you would want to live. They don't I don't think they have a lot of high tech. I don't think they have a lot of protection in place for any of their citizens, and so it's kind of a dismal.
But I'm given the impression in the writing in the first book that the reason humans choose to reside here is either one, they don't have a choice because they're slaves, or it's because the job opportunities are still better in Lunathion / Crescent City than they are in the rest of the continent.
Just another quick note about this because we love Sarah so much.
Yes.
Asphodel Meadows was something that I, on the first read, assumed had been made up. And as I was typing out notes during the reread, I kept noticing that asphodel was not being underlined as, you know, not a real word. So I Googled it, and it turns out that asphodel is actually, it is a flower. It is a member of the lily family, but more importantly, and perhaps a little bit more relevant to this discussion, asphodel was said to grow in the Elysian fields, which is in Greek mythology, it was like heaven or Valhalla. So in Greek mythology, the Elysian fields were where only the greatest mortal heroes could go to rest in the afterlife. So for her to give the name of the mortal quarter, the name of this flower that grew only for the greatest heroes, I think is a really cool. She's letting us know that while the humans may be seen by everyone else as something very low, I think this is a really beautiful way of her planting a seed that says there is greatness still that comes from those of you that may think you are the lowest and the smallest. But we won't get into that too deeply now. So after Asphodel Meadows, you have the Five Roses.
Or Fyro.
I was going to say, affectionately or maybe not so affectionately known as Fyro.
What is it in like, it does it in San Francisco, it's like high-low or like no-pal, like north of the Panhandle, or like you have like Soho.
I was going to say Soho, yeah. So you have Fyro, and this is home, majority, I think, Valbaran Fae. A lot of the Fae live here. I think there could be some shifters that live here as well. Maybe some Malachim, although the Fae and the Malachim do not get along.
I think it's important to note that like it is not like so rigidly structured that there are not exceptions to any of these rules.
Correct.
But yes, the general status is that it is mostly Fae, wealthy Fae that live.
I was going to say, it's not necessarily that all of Five Roses is inhabited by the wealthy Fae or the Fae nobility, but I'm pretty sure all of the Fae nobility and or Fae royalty live in the Five Roses.
Correct.
So that's just kind of something to note about this particular district. And the leader of this district is the Autumn King, and he is High Fae, and he is the king of all Valbaran Fae, whether they live in Five Roses or / Lunathion or not. He is the king of the Valbaran Fae.
Important to note that he does not rule over the Avalon Fae.
He does not.
I'll just leave it at that.
Correct.
Also, I just have to say, it's kind of cool that Ethan's pack is called Four Roses, and the Fae's district is called Five Roses.
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah. Continue.
Okay, continuing. So the Autumn King has been the ruler of this district for about 400 years. So he's been around for a very long time, but he does, even though he is called a king in his title, he still answers to Micah. Because Micah was appointed by the Asteri.
Correct.
So after Five Roses, we have Moonwood, and this is the home of the wolves predominantly. So all of the wolf shifters live in Moonwood, and the, again, officially unofficial head of Moonwood is the prime of all of the wolves in Lunathion.
I think it's also is it in the continent as well? I think the prime happens to live in Lunathion, and he is the leader of all the wolves on the continent, but
of Valbara.
Of Valbara,
yes.
Correct.
Yep. I believe that is correct, yes. So that kind of takes us all the way around our circle here. I'm going to jump in.
Own territory in the city. It's more like a figurehead position.
Yes,
Correct.
she is a figure of respect, and she has been around for a very long time, but she does not participate in things like the summit.
And I believe there are a finite number of oracles in Midgard.
Yes, she is a being of great power, but she does not wield any real influence in the politics of Lunathion.
She kind of reminds me of the cereal, how they're like a very specific number.
Oh yeah, I think that's a very
cereals.
Yep, I think that's a very good comparison to draw.
Cool.
Absolutely. And then the other sort of district that we have to talk about is the Blue Court. And again, as I mentioned, it is, in the Istros River. It is separate from the rest of Lunathion in a lot of ways, probably in more ways than it is a part of Lunathion. But the River Queen, who rules over the Blue Court, does still at the end of the day answer to Micah. She's given more freedom. I think of the Blue Court as being a little bit like a Vatican City within the country of Italy.
Right.
Like they are given a lot of freedom, and they have their own jurisdiction over their own people.
I believe they don't show up to the stuff that the rest of the heads of state are required to show up to.
Typically. Yeah. She does send a delegate to the summit at the end of Earth and Blood, but that's because that's like a very special occasion. On the whole, they operate independently but adjacent to.
Yeah, and pretty much all members of all people who reside in the River Court are members, and we'll talk about this a little bit more momentarily, of the House of Many Waters.
Yes.
Which, again, to me seems like the most separate out of the 4 houses to the other 3.
Right.
Just the same way that the Blue Court is.
Correct. And you will see when you look at your map that the other thing that is labeled besides these particular districts are the gates. And there are 7 gates.
Surprise, surprise.
Throughout Lunathion. And these gates are... It's difficult to talk about.
Difficult to say.
It's difficult to say exactly what the gates are.
They are made out of quartz, mined, like massive, massive slabs of quartz that I believe are mined from like northern mountains in Valbara. So still on this continent. And they, like, in ancient times were used as a mean of communication between different sectors of the city.
Yes, and you actually get a really good breakdown early on in Earth and Blood about how the gates work and what they mean to the city. So,
actually, yeah, Bryce and Donica use them.
And it happens very early on, so I don't think it's something that we need to break down here. But basically, each district, each court gets a gate sort of assigned to it. Even Asphodel Meadows, there is the mortal gate.
Yeah, and you have to, the way they work is basically it's a trade system. Like you give a drop of your power, and I'm not sure how that works for the humans now that I think about it. But I don't think they can I don't think that they were ever meant to it's a mechanism for the veneer. But you give a very, very, very minuscule tiny drop of your power, and you are able to talk through the gate or like make a wish. Right.
Yeah, they've become kind of tourist attractions, particularly the Heart Gate, which is in the old
sector,
the old square. The old square. I was going to say Old Town. Hi, we live in Virginia. Which is in the old square, and that has become a big like tourist attraction, basically. And people touch the disc in front of the gate, and it zaps a little bit of your energy, your kind of like life force, and it doesn't deplete you in any way.
No, not at all.
But once it takes,
it's like a drop in the ocean, if you will, of your power.
And it is very similar, I would say, to like visiting something like the Trevi Fountain, where there's all this. It's become a source of lore, a source of mysticism. It's kind of legendary.
It's like kissing the Blarney Stone or something.
Kissing the Blarney Stone, tossing something into backwards into the Trevi Fountain. It's a big touristy attraction. And again, there's a great scene between Bryce and Danica very early on in House of Earth and Blood that talks about the gates a little bit more, and I think they do a really good job of it. So I think the next thing to discuss, now that we sort of have that zoomed in view of where our characters are living and operating day to day, is to discuss this is kind of a caste society.
Yeah. And I think that let's begin with talking about the 4 houses of Valbara. So we've done the geography of Lunathion, but let's talk about...
Valbara, so the houses don't extend throughout Midgard. It's just in Valbara where these classifications are...
I believe so.
Okay.
And these were established, and we'll talk about this again a little bit later in the episode, probably in the spoiler section, but basically after the first wars were finished, as of, I believe it says on the first page of the book, as of 33 VE, which I believe stands for Veneer Era.
Okay.
And then there was HE, which was the Human Era, and I might be getting that wrong, but I know that they do it kind of like BC and AD, like the way that we do, like after the first wars were done. So about 33 years after the first wars ended, the
sort of the inception of this whole
house
civilization.
System, I kind of think of it as the Harry Potter houses, even though it's super not. These houses represent the totality of the creatures in the world of Valbara.
It's almost scientific. It's not,
but it's not, because it's also super racist. But
it's really.
And we learn important that
it is a caste system,
and you can defect from your house,
and it plays into the larger feudal system that really is sort of the basic structure of this civilization of Valbara.
Correct. And this is outlined pretty early in her books. I think she even has it on the first page before the actual story begins. But we have the House of Earth and Blood, which is the namesake of our first book. And these are creatures that were picked by Luna, the goddess.
Yeah,
and
each house is associated with kind of a patron goddess.
And so
Or
in
god.
this house are humans, because humans still have a house, shifters,
Yes.
witches, and animals. So characters like Donica would be House of Earth and Blood. Hypaxia would be House of Earth and Blood.
Bryce is half House of Earth and Blood because her mother is.
But
House
she,
of Earth and
as we learn early on in the book, has to swear allegiance to the House of Sky and Breath. And that house is associated with Solus. You might be familiar with the phrase burning Solus. And members of this house include the angels or the Malachim, the Fae, the elementals, and the sprites. But they were technically kicked out and don't even have a house, which is so sad. I want Lahaba
And it's
to have
wrong.
a house.
It's
so
wrong. And it's
And the sprites were kicked out because of their role in the rebellion. Not the first wars that were 15,000 years ago, the rebellion that was 2,000 years ago. And we will explain that a little bit further later on in the episode. Did I say 2,000? I meant 200. I'm so sorry. And then we have the House of Many Waters, which we just discussed a little bit beforehand. And that is associated with the goddess Ogenis.
Oh, that's so funny. I've been saying Oganos.
Oh, God.
I don't know.
I think that I might
we'll
be
just
correct.
I think we'll just do whatever you think say is best. It sounds
And
better in your
those
accent
are-
anyway.
Those are the the river sprites, the Nox. We get to interact with a Nock in Earth and Blood and the Kelpies. We hate it. Like Therion would be a member of the House of Many Waters.
Which is interesting because, like, there are aquatic shifters as well, but the Mer are not considered to be aquatic shifters. Like, there are shark shifters or dolphin shifters.
Correct.
But
And I think that
Mer are different.
Yeah, and there was actually a note, like even for House of Sky and Breath, there are a couple in there chosen by Luna. Like they again, it's not completely rigid, as in there's absolutely no room for, going between the houses, but this is the general way of things. And then there's the House of Flame and Shadow. And this one contains Reapers.
Dark and scary
Very
house.
dark and scary. It wouldn't be my preference. Demonaki belong to this house. Wraiths. Vampires. Vampires. I know it's vampires, but it's like
But it's spelled with a Y.
It's like
vampires.
It's like the traditional
Vampires?
Romanian spelling. And the necromancers.
Which is a very scary business, seems like, if you ask me.
So the houses, the way they work, they can either have one ruler. So, for example, the House of Flame and Shadow, they all technically answer to the Underking.
Yes.
Or they can
It's like all things dead or death related, and
scary.
he sort of like is death.
all of that.
Again,
Sounds scary, is scary.
yeah. I don't know that if I weren't born into it, I don't know that I would be being like,
Super
you know what? That's
happy
a
to
club
see.
that I want to be a part of. I don't know that would be me, but
Interesting that Jasiba,
to each their own, Jasiba, which we will talk about in a couple of episodes.
She was born into the House of Earth and Blood,
which
but
I would be psyched about, by the way.
Yeah, she defected and she went to the House of Flame
The
and Shadow.
House of Flame and Shadow is basically Slytherin.
See, okay, hang on, quick sidebar. Let's
Let's do it.
So Slytherin, obviously Flame and Shadow. Who is Gryffindor? I
Earth
think
and
it's
Blood.
Earth and Blood. Okay,
Earth and
totally.
Blood.
We're in agreement.
Sky and Breath is Ravenclaw, and Many Waters is Hufflepuff.
Okay. You guys could let us know if you agree.
Let us know if you have a different take. I actually would be. That's actually such a fun game.
And we are so aligned on that. I didn't even have to think about it.
Nope, that happened live in front of everybody.
One very important distinction is the houses can either have one ruler, aka like the Underking, or they can choose to divide rulership between powerful Vanir. So, for example, the Sky and Breath, the Fae, and the Malachim kind of both have heads of prefects, if you will.
Actually, wait, so going back on this whole, okay, I'm actually, you know what? I'm doubling down on this because House of Flame and Shadow, I feel like people are going to have opinions on this. Yes, I know that Slytherin is not all bad.
Slytherin slaps.
Slytherin is sick also. And like, okay, Jasiba, we're going to talk about this, but like
She's
Jasiba
totally a
is
Slytherin.
an insane character and she would be in the House of Slytherin.
1000%.
So I'm doubling down on this that like, yes, there are amazing, cool, brave like characters that come from Slytherin, but on the whole, they're a rotten bunch. Yeah. And so is the House of Flame and Shadow, not to be trifled with.
Not to be trifled with.
Okay, that's all else I wanted to say.
So that is the general breakdown of the houses in Midgard. Yes. Now, let's talk about the Vanir versus the Loas and like what that means, and then we'll go into the rulership system.
Right, because there's sort of two...
There's basically mortals and immortals in quotation marks, people with a very, very extended life.
There's a macro set of distinctions and then the micro, and the houses are actually kind of the micro set of distinctions, and those determine, I don't know, I'm sure they determine things within the government, like when you take census or when you're doing taxes.
Although important to note that it is rude to ask someone their house if you do not know it.
It's way, I think the house thing is way more like demographic, socioeconomic.
I think it's kind of like, are you a Republican or a Democrat kind of situation?
Maybe.
It's like not quite the same, but same vibe-ish. Because it's definitely like a political alliance thing.
Well, but it would also, like, I think it's also kind of like, I think it's closer to like just flat out asking someone, what's your race?
Okay. I like that.
Do you see what I mean? Because it is dependent on like what type of creature are you?
Yeah.
Like what were you born into this world as? Which is just something that no one has any control over.
Which is why the people who they're like half breeds, so and I just say that in quotation marks and with no,
because that is the way they are referred to in the books.
They can belong to either house, and they are kind of looked down upon in society. But we'll get into that in a little bit.
There are a lot of flaws within this system, but that is what makes it interesting to read about.
So the Vanir are basically anybody with magical properties or extended life.
Right. So again, this is the macro distinction, and it kind of just puts you into two buckets. Well, three. So there are the Vanir, which is spelled Vanir, and that you start to pick up on that very quickly. I super started
spelling it like VEN during this and had to check myself multiple times.
Vanir. But yeah, so the Vanir are all of the beings that have power innately, which is sometimes it's magic, sometimes it's just like really heightened raw like energy. It's like they produce their own energy.
Yeah, and we can kind of split those into two, like the higher Vanir and the lesser Vanir, and basically the higher Vanir are essentially those with humanoid
forms. So you've got your Fae, you have the angels, which are also referred to as the Malachim.
Yeah.
And then you have your shifters.
Those are all upper or higher Vanir. And then there's lesser Vanir. And those are anything not human-like, and they do not actually have full citizenships. Those are characters like Syrinx and like the otters, which are the most adorable things ever, and I cannot believe they do not have full rights.
They're so cute.
They're so cute.
Yeah, and even the sprites were considered to be lower Vanir because they do not have the humanoid form. And I think vampires and reapers, because reapers can take whatever physical form they want to. Or no, sorry, those are wraiths. Wraiths can do that. I think reapers are considered to be...
I don't know actually if that, again, like they don't go into every single character in this.
That's true.
I would guess that they are Vanir.
If a Vanir has a humanoid form,
body,
they're probably higher Vanir, and that's your highest class of society, regardless of what house you're in.
Correct.
If you are a higher Vanir, you get full rights. No doors are really closed to you. And
you have the highest socioeconomic status.
And everyone treats you with respect. Nobody's going to mess with you or try and take advantage of you.
Correct.
You get all the best jobs. You get all the best education.
Lesser Vanir, actually, I would say, are treated closer to how Loas are treated. And Loas are any beings that basically are not Vanir. And they are essentially slaves or close to it.
Right.
In terms of their rights.
You've got your humans... your regular animals that don't have any kind of magic, right? Like sprites or chimeras or dragons. Those are animals in a sense. But they are creatures that possess magic.
Correct.
That possess power. Unlike mortal human beings and regular animals.
And a lot of the Lowers live in designated pockets of society like Asphodel Meadows because that is where they are safe and where they do have rights, at least within their communities.
And they're far less likely to be
Food.
used and abused by the rest of the scary veneer members of society.
And they will never be full citizens or civitas, as they say in the book. And I believe that slaves technically have the same rights as humans in the world of Crescent City. But slaves can really take any form. They can be in any house, and they can be a veneer, a lower, a higher veneer, or a lower veneer, like really whatever.
And slavery historically is doled out as a punishment for breaking the law or trying to live outside of the rules that have been passed down for however many years now.
Correct.
And it is a practice that is actively still allowed.
Very much alive and well.
Yeah.
In the Crescent City world.
And it is a threat. You know, people live in fear of stepping out of line and being branded with
SPQM.
Okay.
SPQM.
Which is another incredible nod to, it's not even mythology, this is just history. So in the Roman Empire, of course, all of the Roman slaves, particularly the gladiators, if you've seen the movie Gladiator.
Obviously.
Right? So it's SPQR is what the Roman Empire used to tattoo on all of its slaves, and honestly on the Roman legions as well.
And also just like, that's a great point. Like lots of shout out to like Roman history in this book. Like, hello, the Eternal City.
The Eternal City, the
Crescent City is built on seven gates, 7 hills.
The class
all
system as well. You had the plebeians and the patricians. The patricians would kind of be the equivalent to the veneer. They were the nobility. They were they were the people running the show.
Again,
had
Sarah
all the rights.
just doing her due diligence.
She's so good. She's so good. And the reason these worlds are so rich is because she draws inspiration from so many incredible real civilizations and cultures that existed in society.
Totally. Now that we've explained veneer lowers,
right,
and we've talked a little about the slaves, let's talk about where the slaves fit into that kind of hierarchical ruling system of...
I mean, as you can imagine, the slaves are the bottom of the bottom.
Yep. Bottom, super bottom. But at the top, if we're going to start there, we've mentioned them before, but they are the Asteri. And pretty much from page 0, and I'll mention incredibly quickly, they are like these kind of otherworldly, super powered beings that they don't really come to the page, at least for a while, but they are at the top of the totem pole. Not to be confused with Pangea.
But their presence is felt actively all the time. And like we mentioned earlier, Micah is the Asteri's mouthpiece in Lunathion specifically.
Correct.
So
there are a lot of archangels that report directly to the Asteri, and we're just focusing on that one in this story, focusing on that one geographical segment of Valbara.
And the archangels, if there were to be there are no official designations between the higher veneer, but the angels do tend to be the most powerful veneer. And so it's not that they're, right, like on paper, they're not technically above a high fae or a wolf shifter.
But they are appointed to positions of power that give them more
Well,
clout.
and if they were to get in a fight, like if any of them were to be paired in the fighting pits, the angels would probably win.
Important to know, we missed one tiny thing about the Asteri, that there are, again, 7 Asteri. And this is a perfect opportunity to pour more.
If we're going to talk about politics.
There we go.
Even politics in a fictional world.
I mean, especially in this one, you need it.
Oh, yes.
There are, or were originally, 7 Asteri. And we find out very quickly, so this is not
this
really
is
a
something
spoiler.
that is in the opening chapters of House of Earth and Blood.
And we'll get into it a little bit more in the spoiler section, but one of them was killed during the First Wars, and that's as much as we'll say about that. So although there are 7 Asteri, 6 of them are currently in action.
And it's worth noting that the Asteri always... It's kind of their like brand, right? Like there are like 7 seats and 7 stars, because each of the Asteri
hold the power of
of an entire star within their being. And whenever they depict themselves, there is always they're all seated, and there is always an empty seat to honor their fallen sister.
Mm-hmm. So they appoint archangels, and
because they never leave the Eternal City.
They don't need to.
Such
is their power.
Right. They appoint governors and generals and
in a House of Earth and Blood, our archangel is Micah.
Yes.
And then directly below the archangels are the city heads. And Jessica went into these a little earlier.
Yes, everybody that we talked about. We've got
city heads.
Right, we've got the Underking. Let me see if I can do these from memory. The Underking, the Viper Queen.
Yes.
Autumn King.
Yes.
The Prime.
Yes.
And
the River Queen. That's 5. Who are we missing?
And the Oracle.
The Oracle.
Because the humans don't have one.
Exactly.
But the Oracle, again, like we mentioned, she's really not a political player. She's a spiritual figure, and she is a being of a lot of great power, but she is not involved in the governance of Lunathion.
Correct.
So you've got Micah, and then you've got these 5 sort of city heads that sit beneath him. And they do have a lot of influence.
They do.
And Micah, and it's very important.
I think of it as kind of like the mayor or something of a town, maybe.
Yeah. Yep. And Micah's the governor. And so it is a net good for everybody that these heads of the towns and Micah all have what's the word I'm looking for? Amicable working relationship.
And we're going to put amicable in quotation marks.
Amicable. Everybody is
does
always
what they can
looking
do to
out
keep
for their
things-
own interests, for sure. But it's also a very delicate balance. Nobody wants to rock the boat.
Correct.
You don't want to attract the attention of Micah, and by extension, the Asteri.
Well
But there
said.
are lots of rivalries between these district
courts
heads.
and boroughs and all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So right below the city heads, I would say that the auxiliary and the full citizens and
her pack are a big auxiliary unit, and they are supposed to be peacekeepers. They are enforcers of the code of ethics and the law within Lunathion, which is different from the 33rd, which is the military legion that is commanded by the Asteri.
answers directly to Micah and therefore the Asteri.
Right, and the 33rd is made up largely of
I think it's made up mostly of
Malekith,
Fallen,
right?
And Malekith, although there are some other species, in quotation marks, that do make up the 33rd. It is important to note that they are technically slaves.
Yes, a significant portion of them are. Everybody who...
Not all of them. Yes, a significant portion of them.
Everybody who has, at one point in their life, egregiously stepped out of line has been labeled as fallen, and so they have been stripped of their rights as citizens. But because Malekith are the most powerful veneer, and they are the best and most important soldiers, the Asteri have chosen to punish them with eternal servitude as opposed to death.
To serve the system which they fought to overthrow, essentially. And then, so you've got your citizens, or your full civitas, and then you have your lesser veneer, as we said before, the chimeras, the sprites, the messenger otters, and then even below them, you have your mortals and your humans.
So, not a place you would want to wake up as if you were still human. Humans are the bottom of the barrel.
Yes.
Which places Bryce, our heroine, in a very interesting juxtaposition in society, right? Because on the one hand, she is the lowest of the low. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, she is high fae. I mean, which is one of the highest, that's like right below angels. Mm-hmm. So she's a she's at a very interesting border.
It's, it's one of, we've read about so many people, these stories before. It's like they belong to both, but they belong to none. And therefore, Bryce is looked down on by a large section of the population. And in the very first chapters in Earth
she's
and Blood,
not pure enough to be veneer.
But not low enough to be human, and therefore is not fully accepted by them either.
She's not fully trusted by humans, which is, I think, an important distinction, right?
Yeah.
She's not good enough for the veneer, and they look down on her. But she does make a couple of references, and this doesn't really have any bearing on the plot, so I don't think it's a spoiler, but she does make a couple of references that she just never really felt like human people were totally comfortable around her because she was half fae.
Which is understandable, because the Vinea treat fae like
trash.
The Vinea treat humans like garbage. But that is kind of a cornerstone of her personality and kind of, I think, how she...
Yes. She has a very unique perspective walking through this world because she is half human, half fae.
Correct. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but half-breeds, in quotes, they do end up maybe not in...
There's not a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of opportunity for them.
And Bryce is incredibly lucky in a way, although she really, she had her struggles growing up, and this is not to diminish those, but she is incredibly lucky that she had someone who was able to give her full citizen status, and she was able to live a somewhat normal life.
Yes, and go to
CCU,
right? And I can't
and she
remember.
Didn't live in Lunathion until she went to CCU. Important, she was in.
And then she loved it, and she met Danica,
and she stayed, and blah blah blah.
Had a great time.
You will read the rest.
But it is, and I can't remember if I found this on the wiki or if it was in one of the Reddit threads. But that is really kind of the deciding factor. Like, if you are a half breed, the thing that makes all the difference is how powerful of a veneer is the one of your parents. And Bryce was lucky enough that her sire was a veneer of very, very significant influence and he was able to grant her civitas and full civitas and a place in exchange for her
keeping quiet about some things
and also swearing allegiance to House of Sky and Breath.
And so, speaking of the Vinea and human relationships,
yes,
I think that we did a great job of breaking down the kind of hierarchy.
If we do say so ourselves.
I think that we're geniuses. Let's talk about...
We did our best, guys. I can definitely tell you that.
And I'm sure we left some stuff out, but this is just the kind of general overview. We're here to help you help yourself, basically.
Yeah.
So where we drop into the middle of the story in Earth and Blood, let's talk about the current Vinea human conflict, and we won't get too into the details, but it is helpful to understand where we're at right now. So that is a rebellion, as we mentioned before, that is taking place in a separate continent.
There is an active rebellion going on.
And so
we are in a time of war.
We are in a time of war. And so far, the war is not on, the home front, so to say. It is in Pangera, in the other continent. However, there are certain players involved that are trying to bring said war closer to Crescent City. The humans, about 40 years ago, I think it is, they started not uprising again, but causing trouble, I would say, for the Asteri. And they have started to develop technology and developed different mechanisms to combat the Venea's magic. And that's whatever they can get their hand on. Machines.
I think they were just trying to stand up for themselves. There is just this resentment towards the fact that they've been condemned to exist at the bottom of society with no protection, no support, no inclusion. Into the larger society.
I agree with them.
It's ridiculous.
As a human, I would
also take issue.
I would probably be joining the rebellion as well. But anyway, so that is what is happening kind of across the continent.
Right. It's a war that's happening overseas, but it is a war nonetheless, and it is creating
problems and ripple effects.
Well, and it's gone on for long enough that it's a little bit embarrassing for the Asteri that it's still going on, that they cannot seem to fully squash
and stomp
this
it out.
rebellion. And it also raises the eyebrow because these are supposed to be the most all-powerful beings ever. And still, for years, this piddly little human majority resistance which is giving Star Wars, by the way, which we love.
I love it.
is still fighting. And they're not giving up, and the Asteri cannot root them out. They cannot fully kill them. I mean, I hate to use this analogy, but they're kind of like a cockroach. Like, the Asteri cannot seem to get them to die. Like, just cannot seem to kill it, right?
I love it.
So I think that's just the last additional piece of really important context to understand. Because there's, like we mentioned, there's a lot of information dumped on you in the first couple of chapters of House of Earth and Blood. And so we just wanted to try and break that all down and sort of give you the crash course, the context.
Totally.
I would be so honored. We would be so honored if you wanted to use this as a reference point as you read. Keep that, like, because Googling is a scary thing when you're reading a book for the first time.
Spoilers and it's
beware
very,
of
very
fan
dangerous.
art. Beware of
don't look at any fan art. Don't go to images when you talk. Do not toggle to the image tab.
Pinterest has spoiled way more things for me than any direct Google search. Once they figure out that you're reading these books, they will just serve you all kind. There should be a filter for that.
Totally. Spoilers versus non-spoiler. Now, one more thing I wanted to say about the human veneer conflict is that in the present day, the residents of Crescent City are starting to get worried that this might trickle into their part of the world.
Because it's not going away.
It's not going away. And like that's kind of where we are dropped into the story is there is a character called Philip Briggs who you meet in quotation marks, not on the page, but in the first chapter. He is kind of like the extremist. He leads the extremist section
and he's human, right?
Yep, he is human of this rebel movement, and he tried to plant a bomb, I think in the old square. I can't remember exactly where it was, but basically Danica's character, and you find this literally within the first couple pages, she stopped that. And it is kind of the beginning of that rebellion.
It's the first
taking
time
root in the city itself.
It's the first time. So very recently, the rebellion that's been happening far away overseas that the Asteri are dealing with, and it's not our problem. Within the past few months in Lunathion, it sort of crossed the sea and became very real when he's kind of functioning as a terrorist. He was trying to commit an act of mass violence and mass murder.
He was going to blow up a place so there'd be innocent citizens.
In the name of a greater cause that is happening someplace else.
Correct.
So that event is very much a catalyst for
the events that
a lot of things that are starting to unfold. And so I do think it is important to understand his connection to what is going on in the larger sense of things on this planet.
And that is kind of where I believe,
and that's where we leave you.
I don't think we can go no further until you tune out.
Everything else you should absolutely be more than able to sort of pick up on your own moving forward. We just thought it would be helpful to set the stage, break down the different houses, break down the power structures.
We wish we'd had us when we were reading.
Because it's
so
not,
confusing.
It's not a safe thing to try and Google these things because you find out.
Texted you while we were reading, like what? I'm so confused.
So the funniest question I ever got asked by somebody who was reading these books for the first time was a friend of mine texted me, shout out to you, Olivia. I love you so much. She texted me and she was like, I am so confused. What is Danica?
Oh my God, is this what
she goes, what is Danica? And I was like, she's a shifter. Like she has two forms and she shifts back and forth between a wolf and a human. And she goes, oh my God, thank you so much. I was literally picturing the wolf character from Zootopia. I was so confused. And I was like,
Also a great film.
it was one of the funny. I think it's the best question anyone has ever sent me while reading these books.
Well,
it
thank
was
God
so
you cleared it up for her fairly
funny.
quickly, because that could have been really
But
tough.
we've all had instances like
Yep.
that when you start reading a fantasy book, and especially for me, because I like read really fast and chaotically, and so and you can't do that with these books.
No, you
because
miss so
you will
much.
end up being like, I'm sorry, does this person have a wolf head on a human body? I thought they were on 4 legs 2 sentences ago. Like, what is going on?
It's confusing.
So
And
there's a lot
Olivia,
going on.
no shade.
No
You brought
shame.
us a lot of joy.
It was incredible, and it was understandable. I mean, the opening line is like there was a wolf at the door.
So it must be that.
But then Bryce opens the door, and the next thing you know, Danica's walking around on 2 legs, chucking her duffel bag somewhere, and you're like, wait.
And she's covered in like stuff.
And you're like, what is happening?
So we understand it's confusing. This was for you, but now this is your official warning to exit the podcast.
Yes, I hope this was really helpful. I hope that you guys are really excited to start the series.
Oh, and one more thing. It is, I believe, safe to read if you have not. I mean, you can listen to this if you have not yet read Tog, right?
I think so.
You should really have read ACOTAR if you're going to be reading Crescent City.
Yes, moving forward, I think we should just do a blanket spoiler statement.
Yeah.
Spoilers for the Massverse. If you have not read A Court of Thorns and Roses, first of all, please read ACOTAR before you read Crescent City.
It's essential, as per SJM herself.
And stay off the internet after January 30th if you haven't gotten through everything yet.
Yes.
If you have not read ACOTAR in its entirety, if you have not read Crescent City, books 1 and 2, I am so sorry. I cannot advise that you listen any further.
No,
but I would
7 to now.
love for you to come back and listen once you have read. If you have not read Throne of Glass, listen at your own risk. I cannot promise you that I won't
Mention
say
something, but
anything
it's not
about
the
my
focus of this
favorite
discussion.
literary character ever
Of all time.
of all time.
Say it again, Jessica.
I cannot make promises that she will not come up. And she is a spoiler in and of herself, so.
Correct.
Anyways, this is your big... Okay, I think we've said it enough times, right?
So bye-bye.
Okay, bye. We love you.
Okay, so for this spoiler section, I think we're going to start off with the first war.
Right, so we're going to get into a little bit more the history.
And the reason I put this in the spoiler section is because we could have put stuff in the first part, but you find out a lot more about the history.
If you're listening to this, you've read, hopefully, and you know that the history... Listen, history is written by the victor, and history is not...
always what we think it is.
Always correct. There's a lot of revisionist history that has happened in Midgard, and so we're going to go way back to the beginning.
Way back.
And we are going to unpack the history of Midgard as told by the Asteri versus as told by really our only other source of truth, Adis.
But
Who is, I would like to
Also-
mention, a little shady.
biased and shady, and also he's Regulus for part of the book.
There's a whole lot of there's a big fat
Question mark
asterisk
next
next
to him.
to everything that we heard from Adis Regulus in book 2.
But I do just want to say, before we get into the First Wars discussion, is that it is important to note that we find out about more of Midgard's history in the second book, but it is still not entirely clear. And we obviously
And I think that
believe
is for a reason.
that SJM has left this intentionally to be confusing. There are a lot of holes in this history, and so we for sure do not know everything about this yet, because even every guide that we could find in Reddit or from Yaz or it's like still not complete, and
because it's open to a lot of interpretation.
exactly, and there are ways that you could interpret anything there, hence the hundreds of theories that are out there.
And
on
also
Reddit.
there's a big asterisk by a lot of what we were about to say, because we are going to list what we know, but we are also going to be doing a little bit of inferring with our analysis of the history of Midgard.
So, First Wars happened about 15,000 years ago.
Roughly.
And the year we're in currently, when we're dropped into Earth and Blood, is I think around the year 15,030 something, because the houses, as we mentioned before, were established in the year VE 33. So basically, Midgard was originally essentially just humans and animals.
Which is, again, incredible.
Much like the way that Earth is today. Although I fully believe there are witches here.
Oh, yes.
I believe I am one of them.
And I believe that there were, at one point, dragons and unicorns.
I don't know if I'm quite there with you, but you can convince me.
And mermaids.
I mean, listen, only 10% of the ocean is discovered. So
You can't tell me for sure they don't exist.
I know. So 15,000 years ago, just a quick note about the human population. Its capital city was called Pathos. And I just have to say,
Oh my God.
I did a quick Google before because I was like, I just wonder what Google has to say about Pathos. And I'm just...
Will you just read the direct result, please?
So according to Wikipedia, Pathos, or Pathos in ancient Greek, was a settlement of the, are you ready for it?
No.
Illyrian tribe of the Partheni in southern Illyria.
And if you know,
modern Albania.
You know. Okay, I'm fine.
Although different sites in central Albania have been proposed, its exact location has not yet been found. When we read that, like, there was just a moment of
Please
of
pardon my
silence.
language. My immediate reaction was, fuck off.
I cannot believe that we didn't, like, look this up beforehand.
I can't believe I've never seen this posted anywhere.
Right? So, yes. Take that with however you want to take it.
With a big fat
So
grain of something.
basically, there was this massive war, and we're going to get more into this a little bit, between the Vanir and the humans. The Vanir swiftly won. And
Yes. So
when they came over through the Northern Rift, which we'll explain in a second, but basically what is left of Pathos' library is in Griffin Antiquities in the basement.
Antiquities?
Is it Antiquities?
It's antiquities.
I thought it was Antiques, but it's Antiquities.
And
okay.
Antiques are different from antiquities.
Oh.
An antiquities dealer is someone who deals in, like, priceless ancient artifacts.
And antiques are an old desk.
An antique.
In that case, the remains of Pathos library is definitely
not an antique.
Not an antique. It is an antiquity.
It is a relic. It is an artifact. It is priceless knowledge from a bygone, lost era. We'll talk about it in another episode.
It is unclear as to how the remains of the Pathos library ended up in Jasiba Roga's basement, but nonetheless, that is where it is.
Her basement of all places. Okay, wait. So I just want to make sure. So the very, very prehistoric origins of Midgard was that it was literally Midgard the way it is in Norse mythology, which is just the mortal realm. There were just humans and animals.
Correct. That was an event.
The sort of history of Midgard as we know it today, and as we know it today, I mean as we are introduced to it when we start this book, happened 50. But somehow, portals to other worlds were opened. And a whole bunch of new
creatures,
types of beings just sort of flooded.
Mostly Vanir.
Can you imagine if that happened?
No. I mean, yes, but no.
I don't know if I would be thrilled or horrified.
I mean,
I think it would depend on what they looked like.
That's fair.
If I'm being totally honest with everyone right now. Okay, anyways, keep going. So, 15,000 years ago, all these beings crossed through these portals by some power that we don't understand yet. And this, of course, creates conflict because when you have a clash of a whole bunch of races or species or beings that are competing for the same habitat, there is... without fail,
number of resources and
conflict.
They're all battling for them.
Yes. So this is called, in the history of Midgard, the First Wars.
Yes. And the leader of the Asteres division of the First Wars was Peleus, right?
Well, this is where it gets
murky.
Because at first, right, what you learn is when the rift was opened, yes, the Vanir came to Midgard, the Asteri came to Midgard, the shifters, right, all of that. But through the rift, also came the demons and the princes of hell. Because whatever universal event that happened that opened all these portals, it wasn't selective.
It wasn't just kind of the northern and the southern rifts. It was the gates opened.
It was
as
the gates,
well.
right? They were just
everything
portals.
was open. It was chaos.
It's starting to sound like somebody might have like ripped open a hole in the sky.
Oh, it's giving Avengers again.
No, it's giving Kingdom of Ash. Anyways.
That's
See, I told you I wasn't going to be able to help myself. Anyways, so there was just this cataclysmic event that allowed free reign across worlds, across the universe. People could just sort of step into and out of. It just sort of seems like there was chaos.
And it was basically originally humans versus Vanir.
Right. So the story that we are introduced to is that it was the humans were fighting against the Vanir.
Mm-hmm. And their home base was Pathos, which was their Crescent City, if you will, their capital.
And the humans had made incredible advances in technology, in medicine, in engineering, science, agriculture. I would imagine it being kind of like, I imagine it like ancient Egypt. And I imagine Pathos as being like the Library of Alexandria.
And
when it was lost to history, humanity slid way backwards. I would hope that maybe Sarah drew some inspiration for that, but
I could only assume.
That's just because I really, really hope that there's something like more for humans.
I know. I think if I know her, I would say I think that there hopefully will be.
But there's also the other angle to this, which is that hell was involved in this war as well. Mm-hmm. So through the rift, the Northern Rift in particular, came the princes of hell and their legions, which are very scary.
Get into the makeup of hell in a little bit.
We will.
But what you have to know is that hell was not on the side of the Asteri.
No, and that is consistent, right? We do at this point believe that was true. Where it gets murky
is who is exactly allied with who as it pertains to the Starborn Fae.
Well, but in general, the Asteri have written the history to say that it was them and all of the Vanir. They conquered the humans, and that was sort of easy and small potatoes. But then they had to all defeat the armies of hell and
that battle lasted 3 days.
And seal all of the portals in the Northern Rift so that hell could no longer get back into Midgard. What we learn over the course of these two books is that is not really the way that it happened. The Asteri did come to Midgard and did conquer everything.
But they tried previously to conquer hell, right? And failed.
Well, a lot of people think they also tried to conquer Prithian and failed.
Basically, hell, Asteri don't get along at all.
No, they do not. And so at this point, what we think is the truth. And again, this has a massive asterisk because
not even all of the princes of hell are aligned in what they are telling us all the time.
Right. It's very, very difficult to understand the truth of exactly how things happened. But what we think we know at this point is this event happens that opens all of the portals between worlds. The Asteri come through, defeat the humans, and then they usher in all of these other beings that are ripe with power that they can feed off of. And so they start building their perfect little colony on this planet. But the princes of hell also now have access to this rich planet that is teeming with life. And they hate the Asteri. And so there is now a war between hell and the Asteri. And what we believe is the real truth is that it was actually split. The Vanir as a whole were split. Some of them fought for the Asteri, and some of them were fighting with the princes of hell.
Not unlike the current rebellion, which we didn't really get into, but of course it is not just humans. There are members of the Vanir that do not agree with how the humans and the Lowers are being treated, and they fight, as I would call it, the good fight, mostly with an asterisk because I don't agree with everything that Ophion does. But anyway.
But Ophion also is the extremist branch of the
Sect
rebellion.
of the
And
rebellion.
unfortunately, they are necessary because they are the ones that possess the heaviest artillery, at least from the human side of things. And a lot of the Vanir have now been forced. The greatest value they have is by being covert, like by providing intelligence, by under the table trying to very subtly undermine the Asteri's reign. They have to play the long game.
Correct.
So it's just but this rebellion that is happening when the story opens is not, we come to find out, it's not something new. It's something that's actually been happening since the beginning of Midgard as we know it, but the Asteri won.
Another huge piece of information we find out is that the Starborn Fae were kind of like the warriors, I would say, of the Fae that participated in the first wars. Like, that was the line.
Because I actually don't think, I think the Asteri have been breeding and honing the Malachim over, 15,000 years. I don't think they had the legions that they have now back then. And we do know that the Fae and the Malachim are very closely matched power-wise. So back then, the High Fae were really the only people that had a chance of going up against the Asteri and winning, especially being aligned with the Legions of Hell.
Legions of Hell. And so the kind of warrior queen, we'll call her.
God, it's so hot.
Her name was...
Is there anything cooler than a warrior queen?
I think not.
Like,
So-
it's just giving Lagertha. Like, it's giving
Oh my God, yes.
Lagertha, and I just
Obsessed
I love
with
it.
her.
I
A
love
shield
it
maiden.
so much.
You would be a shield maiden of Rohan.
Oh, I'm not sure,
No,
but
you'd be an
thank you.
elf in Rivendell.
I think I would, yeah.
I think
really-
maybe I'd be a shield maiden of Gondor, if those exist. I don't think I
I
would
think
be
you
cool
could be the
enough to be
first.
Rohan.
I don't know how feminist they are in
I don't
Gondor. I'm
know
going to be
either.
honest with you. At least before Aragorn got there.
Anyway, Taya, Princess Taya, or Queen Taya, Queen Taya was the leader of the Starborn Fae in said first wars.
Yes.
Now,
Just get a
what we
teeny
discover
tiny little
in
top
the second book, actually
Perfect, thank you.
had a romantic affair with Prince Adis, who we will discuss
Hot.
in a second is the Prince of the Chasm, the 5th level of hell.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna add a request to my list of requests for our good friend Sarah.
Good, close, personal
Our
friend,
close-
Sarah J. Maas.
Personal friend Sarah. So you know how I need the Helion and Lady Autumn.
I understand. Oh, you need
I'm
the
gonna
Adis
add
and Taya
Adis and
novella.
Taya.
So Taya is the leader of the
She was the queen of the
queen of the
Starborn
Starborn
Fae.
Fae. Now, she had 2 daughters. One who we know, her name is Helena, and one unnamed daughter.
Very Ravenclaw.
It's very Ravenclaw. And one unnamed daughter that I think on purpose, that name is left out of history, both from the Asteri side and from the extra history that we find out during Sky and Breath. It is intentionally ambiguous, I would say. So during these wars,
So she had 2 daughters and she had a general.
so we find out that Taya and Hel are allies, and then Peleus and the Asteri are allies.
And Peleus started out as Queen Taya's general.
Correct.
And he betrayed her.
Correct. Think of it
And
as
this
Hunt
is-
betraying Shahar.
And this is what we hear from Adis
Adis.
/ Rigelus in book
Correct.
2.
Correct.
So there is there is a big fat asterisk over this version of the history.
But we can only assume that Rigelus was telling some of the truth because he was trying to lure Bryce and gang into the Asteri's.
He was
compound.
definitely trying to bait them, but I still think he could have been baiting them with a lie.
Correct. So Peleus forcibly married Helena, which is Taya's daughter.
Which is also giving a little bit of Hades and Persephone, if I might add.
And he bred her, apparently.
Yes,
then
and
Taya's-
Adis Rigelus says to Rune that Rune is a descendant of Peleus's line.
and has his tainted, icky Starborn light. Because not all
Right.
Starborn light is the same, as we will discuss later.
Right, and he says that Bryce has Taya's.
Pure, beautiful
Starlight.
starlight. Now, Tea's second daughter, unknown name, this is allegedly, she closed the gates and ran away into the night. No one ever heard of her again. And this is when the Senate government...
That seems unlikely.
Seems a bit fishy.
Seems to me like maybe she ran to Valen and cast some pretty powerful spells
to
around
keep it shrouded in mystery and also safe.
Sounds to me like that's what I would do if I were her.
That is when the war ended, was when the gates were closed. Now, one very important aspect of this war was that it was during the end of the First Wars and during that final standoff between the Asteri and between the Starborn was when the Prince of the Pit, Apollyon, he ended up
who was fighting with the Starborn Fae,
ended up killing Sirius. And Sirius is the name of that seventh Asteri that we mentioned earlier, who they always keep a seat empty.
Whom they call their sister, but Sirius is a male name.
So again, the gender or sex of the seventh Asteri is, as of this, I'm going to go out and say, like, unknown.
It's very ambiguous, but the Asteri in general are very ambiguous. I think they're kind of, like, above gender almost, because they're, I think their corporeal forms are...
I don't think we truly know, based on what we find out at the end of Sky and Breath.
I almost feel like they just choose to take that form so as not to, like...
scare anyone
alarm.
more than they already do.
Well, but also, but that's also psychologically, it's easier for people to understand and accept things that they recognize, right? I don't think that's their true form.
I would agree.
You know, similar to the Valg princes in Throne of Glass, they choose to inhabit
the human form.
Humans or humanoid creatures, but they don't actually, and they don't have real form. And their real form is something very ugly, very evil, very sinister.
At least to our eyes.
Yes, to us.
So essentially, when these first wars ended in chaos, one Asteri down, technically the Vanir won.
Right, because we do know, I do think it is true that Adis and Apollyon, at least, were fighting with the Starborn, Tea's legions of the Starborn Fae against the Asteri.
Which were aligned with
Peleus's legions.
Legions of the Starborn Fae. Now, this is when we call it, I'm going to say, Senate government, in quotation marks, was formed at the end of these wars, and the Eternal City was created.
When Tea was slain. So they lost.
They lost.
Hel and Tea's forces of the Starborn Fae lost their fight against the Asteri. And it is unclear exactly how that went down.
Again, a lot of intentional ambiguity around this whole period of time.
But we do know that Apollyon devoured, which is just a very cool word to use.
And they use it multiple times.
Devoured. And now Apollyon is called the Star Eater.
The Star Eater and the Prince of the Pit.
And the Prince of the Pit. And I'm a
hot
huge fan.
Me too.
I'm a big Apollyon
And we'll talk
girl.
about a little bit more about what we know about the Princes of Hell.
Stay tuned for the episode where we deep dive on Adis.
But basically, this is a puppet government. Everything is really everything is truly ruled by the Asteri.
Right. So Midgard, as we know it, is a product of the loss of this war between Peleus and the Asteri against Tea and Hel. And because Tea and Hel lost, that is how you end up with the world that you are in when you begin these books.
Yeah. And I think the one last thing that I think is really important to note, just because it really confused me, was that there are the rifts, which are the kind of the tear in the different worlds.
And it's natural, and it exists naturally.
And then there are the gates, which are almost like portals that you can open in between worlds.
And they have been crafted specifically by materials that are conduits of the type of energy that would be necessary to open that kind of portal between worlds.
And then objects that we know of that can open or manipulate said gates,
or
not
power
the natural
them.
Tez, are things like Luna's horn, which, as we know, is stolen weeks before the events in Earth and Blood, and that kind of like propels the entire story forward. The Star Sword, the harp from Silver Flames, like things like this can manipulate the pathways between worlds, and we do not know the full extent to how they play a part in the story as of right now.
Right. Throughout the Massverse, there are magical, powerful objects that can manipulate things like space and time.
Nicely said.
And there are also characters who, at the height of their power, have been able to manipulate space and time. I'm not going to say it.
Now that we've mentioned the princes of hell, let's talk a little bit more about that. So, the big reveal in Sky and Breath, obviously, is that hell are not necessarily the bad guys, at least not as
Which
a
we
whole.
love.
I know.
Which we love.
We learned that they actually went against the Asteri, and
We learned that 2 of them did at least.
at least. Correct.
Because Thanatos, the prince of the chasm, seems to be...
No. He's the prince of the ravine.
Oh, sorry, the ravine. Adis
Yes.
is chasm.
Adis is chasm.
Thanatos, the prince of the ravine, seems to be a piece of work.
Okay, so here's
He
what we
is
know
a
about the
nasty
princes.
bugger.
So obviously we've talked about the 7 territories of hell and levels of hell before, and hell, we find out, is its own planet. It is not like another
Right.
plane or an underworld like I originally imagined it, and that this was helpful for me. It's like it is actually its own physical planet, not necessarily a separate world, but it is a separate planet.
I think planet and world are...
We don't fully know the extent of how it separates yet.
I think, this is not a fact, I think planet and world are kind of synonymous here. Although that brings into the discussion the concept of a solar system and
we see
and a
moments of that
galaxy,
in
like
the Autumn King's office and in Reese's office.
so it could
we
be
don't
very
know.
different. And so yes, I think hell is its own world.
Okay, so but we do know that it is a planet as well. So it has 7 territories or levels or however we want to call it.
Or is each level of hell a planet?
We don't know. We just don't know.
That's kind of what I'm leaning towards.
And I also just realized that all of her chapters are named like Hollow Trench.
Yeah.
I like literally did not notice that
The
until
sections
today.
of these books are labeled.
Well, the first 2 books are
the
labeled.
sections of the first 2 books are labeled after
The 7 territories of hell, which are the Hollow, and I will talk about this a little more also in later episodes, but the Hollow, the Trench, the Canyon, and they sound more ominous as you go, the Ravine, the Chasm, the Abyss, and the Pit.
So how many do we have left?
No, we have none left. The Pit was the final part of Sky and Breath.
Sky and Breath?
So I'm really intrigued as to what Flame and Shadow, which she's going to
my
name the parts
God.
of her book. I know. And just that was my reaction. I didn't notice either.
Oh my God.
I know.
You just did this to me while we're
I
dating?
know. I'm sorry. Yeah. So the first 3, I believe, are in
Earth and Blood.
Earth and Blood, and then the final 4. I might be 4 and 3 or 3 and 4. I can't remember.
Okay. No, I'm not going to do it.
We'll do it later. Yeah. Okay. No, I promise. I looked before I wrote that down. So, wow. We know that Hell's Gates can be kept closed by a starborn fae wielding Luna's horn, or open for that matter.
Well, what we know is that Luna's horn is an object that can
manipulate.
channel enough power to activate the gates in order to open that portal again. Because whatever happened at the end of that first big war between Taya and Hel and the Asterian Peleus, the conclusion of that was kind of threefold. Onefold.
Shout out to season 1, Jessica.
Onefold is that the 7th Asteri was devoured by the pit. Hot. Huge Apollyon girls. I think our next sweatshirts that we made for each other should say Team Apollyon.
Also,
maybe we should wait until
perhaps some
leathery wings. I think we should wait and see how the third book plays out. The second fold is that Taya was murdered. Or slain, killed. It's okay. She was no more. And Adis was very upset about it. Also hot.
So hot.
The third fold. The third fold is that all of the portals and rifts were sealed. And we know that the Asteri have actually not been able, the Asteri have not been able to open them since
the first wars.
Which is important because what they actually need to do in order to survive is ensure that they can continue like breeding and evolving.
Ew, I hate the word breed.
The inhabitants of this planet so that they can make them even richer and more powerful so that the Asteri can continue to feed off of them.
Totally.
So it is worth noting that I think the third fold, which is the most, and no one's actually said that yet, besides Micah references it when he explains to Bryce why he was looking for Luna's horn, but nobody in the books has actually outright said that the Asteri may have won that battle, but I think something happened on Taya's side. I think a sacrifice was made to seal those portals to weaken the Asteri.
And that is obviously on purpose, since they don't want anybody knowing about the big elephant in the room.
The truth about what happened 15,000 years ago, right? Which
Correct.
is at the heart of every great fantasy story,
and
is the ancient lore that comes
every
to fruition.
little
And
thing that you read, at the end of it, you're like, oh,
Yes.
that makes sense. Now, I just quickly want to reference the 3 people that we currently know reside in Hell, which are Apollyon, the Star Eater, Prince of the Pit. We know that, as mentioned before, that he has leathery wings. And
Yes,
we
we
only
do
know
know
this
this.
because Hunt notices this when Apollyon comes to Hunt in his sleep. Now, Bryce, he also comes to Bryce in her sleep, and she notices that he may be standing in the remains of Pathos. It's like a very dusty plain, and she kind of infers that this could be the ancient ruins of the human city. That is all that we know about Apollyon and how he presents himself. Yes, leathery, not feathery. Adis is Prince of the Chasm. We know that Adis, I wouldn't say frequents Crescent City, but he, as we will talk a
Adis
little bit
seems
about
to have
in
a very
future episodes,
vested interest in the goings on of midday Crescent City, and in particular Bryce Whitman.
Now, he is Prince of the Chasm, which is the 5th level of Hell, unlike Apollyon, which he resides in the 7th level of Hell.
And the
That's
ravine is the
scariest.
4th, right?
The ravine is the 4th, yes.
So we have not met the Prince of the Abyss.
No, we don't know who the Prince of the Abyss is, and there are enter Reddit at your own risk, because there are so many theories as to who that is. But
Oh my god, what if it's Reese?
dude, I know.
What if the Abyss is where the Valg come from?
I know. It's all too much. But Adis, we know that
Ignore me also.
He
I'm
can
just
enter Crescent City
on my
in
third
his
glass of
cat
wine.
form if he goes through the Northern Rift. Or he can only
Right.
come as a human if he is summoned through the Obsidian Salts or in another way, as we see.
Right.
in
So we should
Earth and
should
Blood.
clarify. The rifts and the gates have been sealed at large.
I'm going.
There are occasionally it was almost like someone gave everything they had
to seal it.
to seal it.
Made the ultimate sacrifice, if
And-
you will.
And it was like they got it sealed 90%. Because there is still the occasional demon that will slip through. Adis can come through, but only if he leaves his full powerful form behind. You can obviously still speak through the gates to other parts of Lunathion, but you can't go much further
And
than that.
I love that. Like
And,
90% of the way sealed.
like,
it's
it's
like little
still-
bits can slip. And we know that demons can slip through because people like Hunt exist who
have
his
been hunting
official
demons for a long
profession
time.
is demon hunter. Now, the lost character of Hell that we meet in Sky and Breath is Thanatos, Prince of the Ravine, which is the 4th level of Hell. He sounds, he is scary. We meet him. He's not a nice character. He's super creepy.
There's no hint of I could be your ally, and he says
the
that.
same way that Apollyon and Adis present themselves.
Apollyon and Adis present themselves. Adis fully is like.
I'm
Adis-
waiting for you to
Adis-
activate the armies of Hell. Let's go.
Adis says to Bryce, "The armies of hell await your
Await your
command."
command.
Apollyon says something a little different. Apollyon says, "I've been waiting for a formidable adversary," and it's like,
And
"Are you
also,
talking
I
about?"
don't talk to my brother or know what he's up to. So we're not. That clearly
And
not
Bryce is
aligned
like,
in
"Are you
Hell.
talking about me or are you talking about the Asteri? Like, what are you?"
Thanatos
it's very unclear.
is just a fucking wild card.
Thanatos-
No one knows what's going on.
Well,
with
no,
him.
Thanatos is the one that says, "I have no affiliation with my brothers. I don't share their proclivity
So,
towards
hell-
whatever."
Not like Midgard. It's not aligned in all of its aims.
Listen,
and
it's a world ruled by 7 men. Are we shocked?
no, exactly. Now, the last thing I'll mention about Thanatos is that is a character in ACOTAR, and he is a random lord in the House of Nightmares. And I'll just leave it at that.
Wait, what?
Yep. There is
Thanatos?
There is a Lord Thanatos in the house in the I know, in the Court of Nightmares. Anyway, so moving on to
we're gonna have to start a support group once this book comes out.
Yep. So there are two more things we have to talk about. One is just the uprising and Shahar's rebellion, which I don't think will take too long. And then I just want to explain a little bit about the drop and what that means, because it was something that confused both of us when we read it the first time.
Yes.
So Shahar's rebellion, or the uprising, is something that happened about 200 years ago.
This is what I would call postmodern history of Midgard.
Yes. And this is the biggest war that Pangera has seen since the First Wars.
Yes.
Which is a little bit sad because it wasn't really a war. It was one battle.
It was one battle, which actually was confusing to me. When I was reading it, I didn't really pick up on that until like much later in the series. And maybe that was deliberate. It didn't affect my ability to understand the story, but it was something I didn't really realize until it had been mentioned several times.
So, helpful context.
But I think it is worth noting, again, like we mentioned before, the Asteri began breeding angels and archangels specifically.
Archangels.
I think they really leaned into that after they defeated the Starborn, Fae, and Hell, because they realized that they needed Vanir legions to fight for them, which is interesting because they're supposed to be all-powerful beings that can smite anything. But they needed to build up a legion of Vanir that were more powerful than the Fae. So they started creating Malachim and then optimizing certain bloodlines so that they could get archangels. And this is why you have angels that have varying colors of wings, for anywhere from black to purest white, and it's that whole grayscale gradient.
And just like as a side note, their imperial god for the Asteri, as I think about 50 Malachim that have wings of only the purest white, not one gray feather. So
and these are beings that were bred and very carefully. It's like the clone army, kind of, not one-to-one, but similar vibes.
Now, Shahar was an archangel who rebelled.
And this is so hugely significant that she was supposed to be
like the white knight,
right?
Almost.
She had pure white wings. She was part of one of the prized bloodlines of the Asteri.
And she had a twin named Sandriel. And Shahar, there are theories about Shahar. We won't go into them right now. Just go to the subreddit. She rebelled against the Asteri, and she led about 3,000 soldiers in her elite 18th Legion.
Led by her lover and general, Hunt Athalar,
who you might be familiar with at this point in the story.
The Umbra Mortis.
Hunt was in love with Shahar. I don't personally believe that she was ever in love with him.
I don't think so either.
I believe that she used him because, as we know, Hunt has the unique gift of lightning. They were all enslaved by the Asteri after they lost the Battle of Hundun. Again, this entire rebellion, it was there was a lot of buildup. It all led up to one battle that quickly was squashed, which is why the human...
The fact that the human rebellion has gone on for
40
years
is shocking.
Yeah.
These angels from the rebellion are called the Fallen. People like Hunt.
Everyone who fought for Shahar has been branded as the Fallen, and they have been made slaves. And they have been divvied up, and they bear the SBQM, and they also bear halos. I mean, she pulls from everywhere, right? So it's a crown of thorns.
You might be familiar.
If you've ever heard of Jesus Christ. So all of the fallen angels bear a tattoo of a crown of thorns across their brow. And this was placed there by witches at the behest of the Asteri.
Important to note that the tattoo marks the slave. The halo dampens the power.
Dampens their power. So it makes them lesser. They would be unable to fight back against whomever the archangel is that they have been assigned to, which is the nicest way of putting it. They were really sold. That's really what it was. But again, because these angels, these Malachim, are so vital to the Asteri's hold on control on this planet, they cannot afford to destroy a single one, because they are the only force that the Asteri really fully own. Because all of the other creatures came from another place. They existed way before. And the Asteri have done a very good job of kind of wiping that from history.
Again, history is written by the victors.
It's revisionist history, to be sure, but the Asteri have done a very good job of kind of making all of the other types of Vanir forget that they were not always beholden to the Asteri. The angels, on the other hand, really kind of are. Mm-hmm. So... And it's really cool, too, when you get to Sky and Breath and Ethan has this conversation, or I think it might be Bryce. It's either Ethan or Bryce has a conversation with the Prime. Actually, I think it is Bryce. And even he says, Danica started to remember what we were before the Asteri.
Right. Oh, I gotta get chills just hearing it.
And that is, I think, just the biggest... I think that is the real secret that the Asteri need to keep more than anything else. Is this knowledge and understanding that life existed before them.
There was an entire history of this world before they came along.
And that there are other worlds, right? I mean, that's the massive reveal we get at the end of Sky and Breath.
Of course.
Is that, and this is, I think, what the Autumn King has been searching for, is the truth about where they came from so that maybe he could access that world.
Exactly.
And this is the knowledge that is so threatening to the Asteri.
I think that the most confusing thing for me while reading this was I got a little bit mixed up between the First Wars and the Rebellion on my initial read. And so when you hear about
there's a very long, complicated history in these books.
So when you hear about people referencing the Uprising or the Rebellion, they're talking about something in fairly recent history that was 200 years ago.
Postmodern.
And then when you're talking about the First Wars and kind of ancient Midgardian history, that's
like the origin.
That's the origins of society as we know it today. Now, the final thing I want to discuss, and I put it last because it doesn't really fit into anything we've talked about thus far, but I wanted to talk about it because it is so confusing when you first hear about it.
It's very confusing, and it's also very important to understanding the world that you're living in.
And that is the drop.
And it's referenced a lot. And it's not that you don't understand it because she does do a good job of describing the process and describing how and why it exists.
It's almost like I couldn't visualize it and therefore couldn't fully get it.
And I actually wish I had read Throne of Glass. After I read Throne of Glass, when Aelin goes through her training in Mistward with Rowan and he is teaching her how to dive down into her power.
You understand it more.
The drop becomes much clearer to you.
It is an event where Vanir come into their full power. And when this event happens, this stuff called First Light is given off. And that is given off in proportion to how powerful you are as a Vanir. And the city harnesses your First Light in drop centers.
It's energy.
It is energy,
right? So all Vanir are born with potential energy, right?
And you do not have full access to it until you make the drop.
Right. So
you could choose to age gracefully and without... I mean, no one does. I think it's very, very... I think she says that in the very beginning, it's very rare that Vanir do this. Everyone makes the drop at some point. You can choose to make it at any point in your life. And once you make the drop... Depending on what species you are, if you're a fae, that's kind of around a millennia. If you're a witch, I think it's supposed to be around 5 centuries. It really depends on who you are, but you will have a very, very, very delayed aging cycle.
You have delayed aging, very delayed aging. You have super healing abilities. And
hypersensitive senses.
Yeah, your powers kind of fully develop.
You come online once you make the drop.
So basically what it is all Vanir, all non-mortal beings that have power. And what I love about this series is that power and energy are kind of interchangeable, which makes it more relatable to people who wouldn't normally read fantasy, right? It's actually less magic and more about energy.
Yeah, no, you're right. I like that.
So every single Vanir is born with this reserve, this potential energy inside of them. And it's almost like their bodies have to physically mature before they can kind of activate that potential energy. And the drop is the way that they activate that energy.
And so what that is when you actually almost fall through levels of your power. And you literally reach the bottom of your power and you die. And then you have approximately, I think it says in one of the books, 6 minutes to ascend. And You need
But
someone.
it's called the search, right?
It's called the search.
So
And
when
then
you go to the bottom, you have this spirit. You're supposed to. It's
you
like
enter a spiritual journey. And it takes 6 minutes.
You've got 6 minutes of soul searching to figure
figure
out who you are.
And that is
then-
why you need someone who is either a very close friend or a family member to be your anchor. And
So they
give you
their
the
life
push.
force is keeping you alive, and it actually
they give you the push to make the ascent.
well for everyone else, it's actually a pull because they're still alive,
right.
and we know
So
that for
Bryce,
other people, it's
not.
more of a push. But yes, and so that's a very critical piece of this world to understand because you typically make the drop in a city center. In a special chamber
And then
where
it's a government issued center where they will harness that first light that you give off during the drop, and that is used to power the city.
Right. When you die and then when you come back to life, it's almost I almost picture it like when someone gets shocked to restart their heart.
Yeah.
But it's almost like their bodies, because they're veneer and they produce their own energy, it's like they restart their heart. And that surge of energy when they come back up
I like that.
produces a whole bunch of extra energy that the city can then harness to power the city.
Power the city. Which it does, but it also powers other things.
I'm not even really sure that it does. Because, of course, the horrible realization we come to at the end of Sky and Breath is that actually it's just feeding the Asteri. They are feeding off of every single creature's energy.
So that
exists on this
first
planet.
light that you give off when you make the drop is what powers the city and what the Asteri feed off of.
And
Now,
in theory, like hundreds of people make the drop every day.
yeah, like it is. We're talking about like think of it as again New York City. There are
Right.
millions of people here. Like this is an immense amount of power. And think about every single time that you go to like the Heart Gate and you give a little drop of your power. All of that compounds and actually creates an incredible amount of energy.
Right, but
Now-
then you find out that all that energy that went into the gates, like
It's just
it
that.
kind of seems like the Asteri can't really touch that.
So there is first light and then there is second light. And this is something we discover a little more in Sky and Breath. Second light is released when you die and then you almost have like a second death. And that is when
Second light is the energy that is still possessed by the soul of veneer, whose bodies have perished.
but their soul is still very much intact.
And the soul goes to the bone quarter, and it is guarded by the Underking, apparently,
Allegedly.
until all of their loved ones and anyone who their soul remains their soul remains a force until everybody who remembers them is dead.
I mean, what other movie is that from? Where you die twice. One's when you
Coco.
it's Coco, and then one is when you actually the lost person utters your name. It's very much like that.
It is very much like that. And so second light is
What is released when that lost person utters your name and you pass through.
I don't think the soul but that's where it gets sticky, because it's not that the souls naturally disintegrate or perish. It's that once they are no longer remembered or prayed for, the Underking sends them back, either into the gate or maybe just directly to the Asteri, and they are devoured for their second light.
Again, is unclear.
Yes, a little bit unclear, but that's what we have inferred thus far about the way that all of this works. And it's not a great
No, and it's like
situation.
super upsetting to Bryce and to Hunt when they find all this out.
Well, and to Ethan, because he
Yeah.
knows that is going to be eventually his brother's fate, because he's the only one.
And of course, there's this moment like in the first book where Bryce actually gives up her place.
Bryce gives up her place in the bone quarter
afterlife,
for
in the
Danica.
bone quarter, so that Danica can have it, because they don't think that Danica's going to be worthy because of how she begged for her life at the end. So anyway, that's getting
Because
a little
Victoria played the
so-
recording for Bryce in the interrogation
so
room, which is
fucked up.
messed up.
That is the last thing that I had huge confusion about when
The drop was confusing to me, and it was one of those. I felt a little bit like I was sitting in math class. I was like, okay, I accept this,
but I also don't understand.
but I'm never going to be able to do this by myself without your help. I'm never going to be able to like explain this to someone else. And now I feel like I can, because reading Throne of Glass did help, because Sarah goes into so much detail about what it takes to funnel down into your power and how much active force that takes you to do. Like, the power isn't something that just naturally.
No, you have
like,
to work for it.
You have to really work for it, and it is a
and you
force.
have to face yourself as a person,
Right.
and face the darkest parts of yourself in order to access it.
And I think the drop is a really beautiful extension of that idea that because she wrote Throne of Glass first, and I think I think Sarah loves this idea that magic or power or energy is something that everyone possesses, but only a few can really truly master and not become consumed by it.
Oh, Jessica, that was so nicely said.
Oh, thank you.
You're so talented.
Oh, thank
and
you.
beautiful. So on that note, we are, for you, hopefully under 2 hours. For us, it's above 2 hours, but I'm going to be doing some editing.
We always knew this was going to be the longest one. We actually promised the rest of the episodes are going to be much more concise than this, but there was just...
I think our longest is around an hour after this. It's not going to...
There was too much... We just couldn't bring ourselves to sacrifice any of these subjects in this first episode because the world building here is
so rich and complicated.
So incredible. And
it's complicated.
And B, but you have to understand it to really appreciate all of the events that are going on because this is a very fast-paced book.
Which I think is why we loved it so much more on the reread because we finally understood it all. And it was like, wow, this hits different now.
Everything, yes. Once you really understand the world and you're just living in the action sequences that are unfolding in front of you,
my God,
it gets so much better. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was amazing the first time around, but on the reread, without having to constantly be like, what is happening?
No, it was, and you could fully enjoy it and soak it up and let it just wash over you.
You could really just emotionally invest in it because you weren't actively trying to cerebrally keep up with the world that you were in.
I agree.
Okay, and on that note, we will set you free.
Okay, seriously, thank you. If you're still with us, this was the big one.
This is the big one.
Easier from here
on out. The rest of them are going to be much quicker, I promise, and they're going to be a lot of fun. Not as dense.
I'm not going to plug the handles again.
If you're here, you know where we are, and we love you.
Okay, guys, thank you. We love you. And good night.
6-week countdown. Let's go.
Here we go.